Today's lesson is the diner, as American as apple pie. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to talk about eating. There are many different ways to eat. You can eat at a restaurant, you can eat at home, but if you're in the USA, you might consider going to a diner. And Helen, you lived in New York for a long time, so you probably went to many diners in your time.
Yes, I did. There were many diners in New York City at the time when I was growing up, and I imagine even today there are many diners. But a diner is a very convenient place to grab a bite to eat if you're in a hurry or to have Sunday brunch with your family. And as we will see, it's an American tradition, and it also serves really good food. And lastly, it has a long history.
Indeed, so that's what we're going to talk about today. It's today's subject, the American diner. So let's begin by listening to the first part, and we'll be right back.
The diner, as American as apple pie. Are you in the mood for classic American fare and want loads of options to choose from? Your best bet is to head to the nearest diner, where you can satisfy your desire for anything from a burger and fries to pancakes, club sandwiches, and spaghetti. But perhaps you're looking for something sweet instead. Fear not, for the diner's got you covered with desserts like milkshakes, chocolate cake, and apple pie served with a scoop of ice cream.
大家好，标题中我们可以看到名词 diner。它的意思是美式的小餐馆，例如 We can get a quick meal at the diner before we go to the movie. 我们可以在去看电影前，在小餐馆很快的吃一餐。又或者说 This diner serves the best hamburgers that I've ever had. 这家小餐馆供应着我吃过最好吃的汉堡。
So before we talked a little bit about the diner and how it's an American type of restaurant, so what is a diner exactly? Well, it's a small restaurant and it usually sells food that's simple and not very expensive. Diners usually aren't very big and people can go there for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and you can find them in almost every part of America, perhaps in Canada as well. So if you want to get your coffee in the morning on the go, you can go to the diner and order a coffee.
Right, and in the title we've got this as pattern. We're saying that the diner is something very American. It's as American as apple pie. It's just like apple pie. It is also an American thing, or at least something that Americans identify with. I suppose you could say something is as Japanese as sushi or as Canadian as maple syrup, etc. So the diner certainly is an American phenomenon. And here in the first paragraph it says, are you in the mood for classic American fare and want loads of options to choose from? So if you're in the mood for something, you feel like something, you might be in the mood to have some classic American fare. Here, fare just refers to food.
Yes, so if you are in the mood for classic American fare and you want to have loads of options or a lot of options, then your best bet is to head to the nearest diner where you can satisfy your desire for anything from a burger and fries to pancakes, club sandwiches, and spaghetti. So your best bet to do something means your biggest chance of success of getting what you want is to do that thing. So if you want classic American food, then your biggest chance of getting what you want, American food, is to go to that diner near your house in your neighborhood, because there you can find almost anything to satisfy your desires. You can get burgers, fries, pancakes, club sandwiches, and even spaghetti, which is supposedly theoretically Italian, but it has become American as well.
Right, it's your best bet. It's your best option if you want to buy computer things. Well, here in Taipei, your best bet is to go to the Guanghua Market. And here, of course, you might want to head to the nearest diner, and you can have all sorts of things like these food items that Helen just mentioned. But perhaps you're looking for something sweet instead. So the above items are not sweet. They're kind of salty, maybe savory or something like that, except pancakes can be sweet. But maybe, yeah, you want something sweet instead, like dessert or something like that.
Right. So if that's the case, then fear not, for the diner's got you covered with desserts like milkshakes, chocolate cake, and apple pie served with a scoop of ice cream. So here, the phrase fear not just means don't worry. Fear isn't really being used as, oh, you're really afraid of something, a ghost or something dangerous. Fear not just means don't worry, relax. For the diner's got you covered. Got you covered here simply means it has what you want. It'll take care of you. You'll be satisfied at the diner. And why is that? Because if you want something sweet, first of all, it serves desserts like milkshakes. So, Roger, what is a milkshake? I don't think I've had one in ages.
Me neither, but a milkshake, of course, is a drink that has ice cream and milk in it. And I believe they also might add some other ingredients for sweetness, like berries or chocolate or something like that. So indeed, it can be quite tasty. The thing I did want to mention about this word is that I keep hearing people use this as a non-count noun here in Taiwan. Let's have some milkshake, but we don't use it that way. Milkshake is countable. Let's have a milkshake at the diner, or how many milkshakes would you like today? And indeed, milkshakes can be quite tasty, but again, they're probably very fattening.
Yes, I guess they're the unhealthier version of today's smoothies. But in any case, they're very tasty. And aside from milkshakes, you can get chocolate cake, apple pie, and often in the United States and perhaps in other parts of the world, you can get your apple pie with a scoop of ice cream, which would also be called a la mode.
Right, so you can have your regular meal and then you can have dessert, which is a tradition, at least in American food. And it was quite tasty. You had your main meal and then you had dessert at the end. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now to the second part. We'll listen to it first.
If you're in the United States, you shouldn't have to search far to find a diner, because diners are among the most common types of restaurant in the country. In fact, Americans have been eating at them for over 100 years. The earliest version is thought to trace back to Walter Scott, who started selling food to evening shift workers out of a horse-drawn wagon in 1872.
第二部分我们介绍名词 shift， 它指的是轮班或是轮班的工作时间。例如 Olivia is tired because she worked 2 extra shifts this week. Olivia 这周因为多值2次班，所以很累。或者 You can only change your shift with permission from the manager. 你只能在获得经理许可的情况下，才可以变动你的班表。另外，这个字也可以当动词，就会有转移或是移动的意思。例如 Steve gave the cart a push to shift it out of the way. Steve 推了一下推车，让它离开走道。又或者说 I shifted the bookcase so it lined up against the wall. 我移动书柜，好让它可以靠着墙。
So in the last part, we talked a little bit about what you can eat at a diner. So what happens if you're in the United States and you're looking for a diner? Well, if you're in the United States, you shouldn't have to search far to find a diner, because diners are among the most common types of restaurant in the country. In other words, there are many types of restaurants across the United States. You can find Italian restaurants, French restaurants, cafes, but chances are you'll be able to find a diner almost anywhere near you, even off the highway.
Indeed, and especially in the eastern part of the USA, I seem to remember visiting relatives out there. There were diners everywhere, whereas where I'm from in the Midwest of the U.S., yeah, we have diners, but they are few and far between. You have to travel kind of far to find an actual diner, but again, if you're in the USA, you shouldn't need to search too far to find a diner, because they're a very common type of restaurant in this country. In fact, Americans have been eating at them for over 100 years. So diners do have a history, and Americans have been hanging out at diners for many, many years. The earliest version is thought to trace back to Walter Scott, who started selling food to evening shift workers out of a horse-drawn wagon in 1872. So if we look back in history, we can use this phrase to trace back to. We can kind of do some research and we can find out where something started. It apparently started with Walter Scott. This was a person who sold food to evening shift workers, and he had a rather unusual way of bringing the food to those people, which we'll get to in a second here. But if you work in factories or if you work in businesses or whatever, we often have different shifts. There's the day shift, there's the night shift, and there's the graveyard shift. Like for a while after university, I worked at a motel, and I worked the graveyard shift, which went from, I think it was 11 at night until 7 in the morning.
That's right. And a lot of people who work in hospitals have graveyard shifts as well. Doctors, nurses, they have to work throughout the night. And when these people get off work, sometimes they're hungry or they want a cup of hot coffee. And Walter Scott had an idea to start selling food to these people who worked evening shifts or who worked in the evening. And since perhaps he didn't have money to open a restaurant, he decided to sell food out of a horse-drawn wagon. Now, this was in 1872, so it was common for wagons to be drawn by horses instead of having motorized cars. Now, a wagon is a type of car or a vehicle that has 4 wheels, and it's usually pulled by something. It can be pulled by horses, as in this example, and it's usually used to carry heavy loads.
Right, so that was the first version of the food truck, which are quite common in the USA now. They actually drive a truck to a certain location and you can go there to enjoy different kinds of food. That's what this reminds me of. He had this horse-drawn wagon and he would provide food to shift workers when they were done with their shift and they were hungry. They could go to his wagon and get something tasty to eat. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson. Let's listen now to the third part.
Prior to that, street food vendors generally sold one simple item during the day, and restaurants usually closed around 8 p.m. By serving meals after other places had shut for the night, Scott's lunch wagon and later imitations filled a previously unmet demand and did brisk business. By the late 1880s, the simple eateries were so popular that food wagons began to be produced commercially.
第3部分我们可以看到单字 vendor， 它是名词，意思是摊贩或是小贩。举例来说 Not many vendors were out because of the rain. 因为下雨的缘故，出来摆摊的摊贩不多。又或者说 Elsa bought 3 sandwiches from the vendor. Elsa 从小贩买了3个三明治。接下来我们介绍名词 imitation， 它的意思是仿制品或是模仿、仿效。例如 This isn't a real fur coat, it's just an imitation. 这不是真的毛皮大衣，这只是仿制品。又或者说 This bag is an imitation of a more expensive designer model. 这个包包是另一款比较贵的设计师品牌的仿制品。另外补充这个字的动词 imitate, I-M-I-T-A-T-E, imitate. 它的意思是模仿。例如Michael's pet bird can imitate all sorts of sounds. Michael 的宠物鸟能模仿各式各样的声音。或是 I'll show you the dance moves and you can try to imitate me. 我会向你示范舞步，然后你可以试着模仿我。最后我们看到单字 brisk， 它是形容词，指的是兴隆的、繁荣的、轻快的或是生气勃勃的。例如The restaurant does brisk business at midday when workers from the nearby offices are on their lunch break. 每当附近办公室的员工午休时间，那家餐厅的中午生意就很好。或是 Sam takes a brisk walk for exercise in the park every evening. Sam 每天晚上会在公园快走作为运动。
So in the last part, we talked about Walter Scott and his idea of selling food to evening shift workers out of a horse-drawn wagon. Now, what happened to these types of foods being sold to evening shift workers before Walter Scott had his idea? Well, prior to that, street food vendors generally sold one simple item during the day, and restaurants usually closed around 8 p.m. So in other words, before Walter Scott came along, or prior to Walter Scott's idea, that's what prior to means. When you say prior to something, you're saying before that thing happened or before that thing existed. Street food vendors or street food sellers, that's what vendor means. A vendor is a seller. They generally sold one simple item during the day. And restaurants usually closed around 8 p.m.
Right, so they specialized in one type of food. Maybe one vendor would sell hot dogs, another vendor would sell fried chicken, etc., etc. So they didn't have much choice there. And then if you wanted to go to a restaurant, they closed early. They closed around 8 p.m., as do a lot of stores in Western countries. I hear this complaint from people from Taiwan who travel overseas, especially to Europe. Oh, everything closes so early. If you're hungry at 9 p.m., you're out of luck. The restaurants are all closed. I suppose those shift workers had that problem. And here in the next sentence, it says, by serving meals after other places had shut for the night, Scott's lunch wagon and later imitations filled a previously unmet demand and did brisk business. An imitation is just a copy of something. Like, for example, if you want to buy an expensive watch, I remember going to Hong Kong many years ago, people would ask you, hey, we can sell you a fake Rolex. That's an imitation. It's not the real thing. Of course, it's going to be much cheaper. But in any case here, they had different imitations. People saw his idea and saw that he was successful. So they thought, we should do that too. So they kind of copied his idea.
Right. So an imitation can be said to be something that is copied from something else. And usually when you say it's an imitation, you're implying that it's not as good as the original. So because Walter Scott had some success with this lunch wagon, he was probably making money. Later, imitations came along because they wanted to get in on this business. And these imitations, along with Walter Scott's original lunch wagon, filled an unmet demand. Now, the word unmet is used for saying that what is needed or wanted has not been provided or it hasn't been done. So before Walter Scott and these imitations came along, there was a demand for food after a certain hour. And before they came along, this demand was unmet, meaning they wanted something, but they weren't able to get it. When these other wagons came along, the demand was met. As a result, these businesses became successful and they did a brisk business, something that is brisk, moves quickly or moves suddenly. It's a fast kind of movement.
Exactly. So again, Walter Scott's lunch wagon and other imitations were able to meet demand for hungry customers who just got off work and were starving. They were hungry. So of course they met that demand. They saw this business opportunity and they did quite well. They had brisk business. People came and went rather quickly and they made money hand over fist. And by the late 1880s, the simple eateries were so popular that food wagons began to be produced commercially. So here we've got the word eatery, which is another word for a diner. It's just a place to go eat something, an eatery. It's not as common as using, say, a diner or a luncheon or a restaurant. An eatery, of course, is a place to go eat, a place to have some food. And they became very popular, so everybody jumped on the bandwagon there. They all had the same idea, and food wagons actually started to be produced commercially. You actually had factories producing these food wagons that people would buy and use.
That's right. Now, the word eatery, it seems like it's coming back now these days. It's becoming more popular because there are some restaurants, especially Western restaurants in Taipei, that call themselves eateries. They don't really really call themselves a restaurant or a cafe or a diner, but rather an eatery, which is a little bit more informal than a restaurant because you might stay there for less time. And it's a bit more complete than a cafe because perhaps it offers more food or wider choices in the cafe, which people usually go to for just coffee and a small snack.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to listen to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文一开始问读者想尝尝经典的美式料理，并希望有大量的选项可以供选择吗？ Your best bet is to head to the nearest diner. 最好的选择就是前往最近的小餐馆。那文中用到 best bet 来表达最好的选择，我们要来补充相关的用法哦。好 ，bet bet 它是指打赌、赌注，那么引申表示可能是选择啊、计划、对策、办法等等。我们用 somebody's best bet 去表达某人的最佳选择，某人最安全可靠的办法。像如果要给予建议的时候，你就可以用 Your best bet is to 点点点，你最好的办法就是怎么样怎么样。举例来说 If you want to avoid traffic, your best bet is to take the MRT. 如果你想要避开车潮，最好的办法就是搭捷运。好，那么 best bet 也可以换成 surest bet 或者是 safest bet， 意思差不多。那补充一下，我们还可以用 a safe bet、a good bet, a sure bet 去表达说极有可能会成功的事物，十拿九稳的事物。常用的句型就是 It's a safe bet, It's a good bet, It's a sure bet 等等，去搭配 that 子句来表达很可能怎么样，肯定怎么样。举例来说 It's a safe bet that Kim will get the promotion. Kim 很可能会获得升迁。好，那么课文第二部分有提到说美国人在小餐馆用餐的历史已经超过100年。那么人们认为最早的餐馆能追溯到Walter Scott， 他在1872年开始用4轮货运马车向晚班工人出售食物。那文中是用 trace back to 来表达追溯到什么什么，我们就来整理相关的用法。首先 trace 可以当及物用，那么 trace something back to 点点点就可以表达某事物可以回溯到什么，可以追溯到什么。后面你可以接时间啊、来源或是原因等等。那这个用法也常常用被动语态来表示，你就可以用 something be traced back to 点点点来表达某事物可追溯至点点点。举例来说 The custom can be traced back to ancient Egypt. 这个习俗可追溯至古埃及。好，那么第二个用法是 trace 可以做不及物用。那么 trace back to 意思就会跟 date back to 或是 go back to 一样，表示始于什么什么时候啊，追溯至什么什么时候。像 trace back to the 10th century 就表示始于10世纪。好，在这边也补充一下 date back或是 go back 的用法。 date back 或是 go back 也可以表达追溯到、回溯到的语义。那第一个用法我们就可以用 date back 或是 go back 去接一段时间，像 date back 200 years 或是 go back 200 years 就是追溯到200年前，始于200年前。那么第二个用法是你可以用 go back to 或者是 date back to 接过去的某个时期啊、年代或者是事件，像 date back to the 14th century 追溯至14世纪， date back to the Stone Age 追溯至石器时代， go back to the French Revolution 就可以表达追溯至法国大革命。好，那以上是今天的重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Diner. We stopped at a diner just off the highway for lunch. Shift. Erica works the night shift, so she sleeps during the day. Vendor. Terrence is currently a sausage vendor, but he wants to own a restaurant someday. Imitation. The painting was a poor imitation of a famous work by Picasso. Brisk. The demand for the new video game has remained brisk for weeks. Eatery. The small eatery had just a few tables and a simple menu.
Well, everyone, today's article has come to an end, and I sure hope you enjoy reading along with us. I am Helen.
I am Roger.
See you next time.